This week on the Chronicles, we will be reviewing Clash of Histories in the South Caucasus, redrawing the map of Azerbaijan, Armenia and Iran by Ruben Galician. Shaping national identities, nation building and establishing territorial claims are some of the themes explored in this book. The book also concentrates on ethnicity and cultural heritage as especially powerful symbols for territorial claims, a process exemplified by the Republic of Azerbaijan's state-sponsored invention of its own national identity. To give us an analysis of the book, we interviewed Gagik Sarkisian, researcher at the Armenian Institute in London, who began by discussing the geopolitics of the subjects covered, as well as the author's focus on cartography as an important research tool.
Gagik, thank you for joining us on the Chronicles. I know you've read the book and studied the maps, and you know the author, which is why we thought you'd be an ideal guest to talk us through some of the issues that Ruben covers in his latest book, The Clash of Histories in the South Caucasus. Now, obviously, he's put a lot of effort into this, and he expresses a very firm view. What did you make of his intentions for this?
Oh. Well, I applaud his intention, because I think he was trying to put the record right as far as the geopolitical situation in Caucasus is concerned. And I do fully support what he's doing, because not many people have tackled this question in the past, or if they have done it in a very, very subjective way. I think he's tried to remain objective in his book.
Do you think what he says about the history that he writes here, will that be widely accepted, do you think, or do you think it will be challenged?
I think it will be widely accepted by historians, because he's basing what he's saying on cartography, on maps and also travelogues, ancient histories, etc. So his voice is not very prominent in the book. I think we have many other voices from the past supporting his viewpoint.
I think that's what's interesting about the sort of the pre-1918 chapters, the sort of then creation of Azerbaijan, the way he does quote numerous travellers going back to the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries who comment on what they've seen, which have been sort of airbrushed out by Baku, as it were.
In a way, yes. I don't really mind for a country adopting a name. Like, for example, Jordan comes to mind. It's a country which didn't exist before the First World War. It came into being afterwards. Now, there are people living in that country who consider themselves as Jordanians. They won't think of any other citizenship or nationality. I think the same thing goes with Azerbaijan, which was a name adopted in 1918 for that country north of the river Arax.
I mean, one of the things that fascinated me about the book, not just the analysis that goes with it, but these remarkable maps. I mean, obviously, the author, Ruben, is a very experienced cartographer. So
indeed, yes.
He can look at a map and see things that, as an amateur, one wouldn't. But it does appear that some of the more modern maps in Azerbaijan have been altered quite considerably to sort of prove the modern case.
Yes.
So I suppose it's a question of preserving these more ancient maps if historians of the future are ever going to sort out who owned what and who was where.
That's right, yes. I'm sure true historians in Azerbaijan themselves know what the truth is, but whether or not they are able to express and their opinion and maintain their current positions, it's another matter.
We discussed the book with author Ruben Galician, who shared with us his reasons for writing the book, his background, and the obstacles he has overcome to write this book.
Ruben, we're going to talk about your new book, The Clash of Histories in the South Caucasus, but before we get to the meat of the book, tell our viewers a little bit about your back history.
Well, my background is that I was born in the northwestern Iranian city of Tabriz in an Armenian immigrant family. Later on came to UK to study engineering. I went back to Iran, worked for a number of years, and just happened that just after the Iranian Revolution I was invited to work here. So I'm settled here with my family. From the childhood, from school age, first grade even, I was interested in maps and mapping and used to copy them and find maps, different maps of different atlases in Iran. And when I came to UK, I had a good chance to go to the British Library and the auctions and study them from close by. And I spent all my free time studying cartography, mapping, geography, etc. A number of occasions I've had libraries asking exorbitant prices from me, cost from me, for lending me just a slide of a map to have a look at it and return it. I've paid $150 for rental for 3 months for a slide of a map. I won't tell you which country. But when I was in Iran, I went to Tehran, Musée Iran Bastan, and there was a map of manuscript map of Istakhri, 9th century, 10th century. And I wanted to see him, and they said, no, you cannot get it out of the box.
Really?
You cannot. So I said, I'll talk to the head of the museum. When he wasn't in, so I wrote him a letter that I'm so-and-so, I'm preparing these books, and I would like to have a look at this map. And if possible, I'd like the copy of the such and such map from this book. In about 2 weeks' time, I received a CD with the whole book copied on it.
Oh, really?
High quality.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And saying that you're free to use it whenever, whatever in a manner you want.
Yeah.
And these are two contradictory sort of policies that I've met.
Rubin develops his point by explaining the background and history of the lands of the Aras River. He goes on to discuss the formation of a new country, the Republic of Azerbaijan, and the country's struggle to identify its sense of history and national identity. In Chapter 1, he states that its adopted name, Azerbaijan, had never in the past been used for the territory occupied by the new nation, being taken instead from the province situated just south of the river in the neighbouring country of Iran.
I just wondered a bit, Ruben, why you felt it necessary to write this book, because you are trying to sort of put the record straight on a number of bits of history, if you like. Was that something that was irritating you felt a story needed to be...
Well, when I was researching maps, I noticed in many maps sort of political influence when drawing the map, borders, etc. But when I started looking at the maps prepared by Azerbaijan, it was completely different world. There was not a single map that was correct, politically correct, historically, or correct geographically. And for instance, in the historic atlas of Azerbaijan, the territory from Dagestan, this is north of the Caucasus Mountains, down to Ghazvin and Hamadan in Iran are called Azerbaijan. There's no name of Iran, there's no name of Armenia in those maps. This was rather irritating, and I thought to go after it and find the reason that these have been made.
Are these old maps that have been altered, or are these sort of post-1918 maps that have been created to keep...
These are maps prepared by Azeri historian cartographers recently.
Recently, yeah.
Mainly in the Republic of Azerbaijan, independent Republic of Azerbaijan. The old maps you cannot alter. Even the Islamic maps, which date from the 10th century to the 20th century to the 19th century, do show the true names of the countries lying there. Yeah. And this got me into the historical archives, so to speak, and into the old history. You know, the territory north of the Arax River historically was Caucasian Albania. In Farsi and Arabic, it's called Aran. In Armenian, it's Arvank. However, this was from north of the river Arax, and from the Arax River to the north, not to the south. Yeah. And the real Azerbaijan is the south of the river Arax, which was the Iranian province since time immemorial. And the old name for that territory was Lesser Media. And during the time of the reign of Alexander the Great, the territory was named Atropaten after its military leader in his honor. This name Atropaten gradually evolved, turning into Arabic, Aderbagan, Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan finally. And this is the reason of the existing name south of the Araks River.
So roughly the name of the country that we will know as Azerbaijan, which was created in 1918, before that, what would you have regarded as the territory that they would now call their country?
In all maps, including Islamic and Persian maps, the territory north of the Araks River is, until the 10th, 11th century, is called Aran, Albania, Caucasian Albania. Strabo writes about Albanians being in that territory. They lived, he says, 26 tribes who didn't even understand each other's languages. Yeah. And it got carried on, and the British and European historians and chroniclers have written about the same thing. When the Caucasian Albanians accepted Islam, the area was ruled by various khans appointed by military rulers and by the rulers of either Ottomans or the Persian empires. At that time, the territory started to be called Shirvan, which continued until the 1918. Yeah. And in 1918, the pan-Turkist party of Musavat, when the country was established, the three countries of the South Caucasus claimed independence after the fall of the Russian Empire. The two countries, Georgia and Armenia, reverted to their old names, but the country of Azerbaijan didn't go back to their name Shirvan, but decided to use, at that time, decided to establish the Republic of Azerbaijan, borrowing the name from the neighboring province of Iran.
Yeah.
It's similar to Macedonia, when after independence this happens, and there was a piece of Yugoslavia that is called itself Macedonia.
Gajik Sarkisian continues with his analysis of the book, discussing the fundamental identity changes a country goes through during the transitional process. He believes that Azerbaijan's period of change was legitimate as they were forming a new country, but concedes that they may have gone too far with some of their objectives.
Gangig, obviously in 1918 when Azerbaijan was formed, any new nation, however it comes to be about, wants to sort of create its identity. Do you think it's gone too far in trying to sort of crush the history of others in order to achieve that?
I think so. It's perhaps quite legitimate to try and create an identity when you form a new country. Like, for example, Lebanon. There's a certain segment of the Lebanese population that claims descent from Phoenicians. I don't think, however, that they are trying to falsify the history of the region and their neighbors in order to establish this identity. That, yeah. I think the Azerbaijanis have gone too far unnecessarily. They could have just continued to build this new nation that came into being in 1918, even if the name had no historical precedence in the region. They could have either accepted that and carried on. That would have created a better relations with their neighbours.
Do you think the mindset of the sort of essentially the ruling clans, because it's not much of a democracy, is clearly fueled because of the oil and gas wealth, but that's not going to go on forever? Do you think this sort of big stamping attitude is something that will temper with time?
I think it has been intensified by the petrodollars pouring into Azerbaijan, but this isn't something which started in 1991-92. It had been going on in Soviet times as well, to a milder degree, but it's a process which started some time ago, and it's continuing. Whether or not it will come to an end when the economic might disappears, I don't know.
And you can understand that for sort of first or second generation Armenians who've settled into different parts of Europe, for example, here in London. But for the younger generation, for the sort of the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren of people who've gone through all the changes, do they still take an interest in the sort of history that Ruben writes about here, or is it more, well, we're now in London, let's get on with London, and that was Grandpa's problems, not mine?
I think, surprisingly, an increasing number do. Both here and in other parts of the Armenian diaspora that I know, like like France and North America, that I would say perhaps more so than their parents did.
Really?
The parents who were more concerned about establishing a business, getting an income to make the family live. Now their children, who are born and bred in their countries of the host country, I think an increasing number is taking more interest in what's happened and what's happening now.
The author develops the arguments disseminated in his book with a particular focus on the history and the cultural changes that Azerbaijan, Armenia and Iran have all gone through. He also touches upon the influence that Joseph Stalin has upon the region after the Second World War. Later in Chapter 1, he states that Stalin's method of realizing his political course, the elimination of inequality, was known as korenzatsiya, translated roughly by Yuri Sletskin as taking root or radicalization, which continued until the 1920s and 1930s, or, according to some researchers, much longer.
You deal a little bit in your book, not for a large part, but in one of the early chapters, with the influence of the sort of Soviet Union, Soviet Empire, however we want to describe it, and how that part of the geography was fitting into that.
When the communists took over the countries, those three countries, and they kept the name of Azerbaijan, which was a newly installed name, because it suited their purpose. In the future, they could use it to their political end. So this happened in 1947, when after the Second World War, the area tried to be joined with Soviet Azerbaijan. And again in 1990s, Elchi Bey claimed that these are our brothers, they have to join us. And they even changed the name of Iranian province of Azerbaijan to Southern Azerbaijan. All these were encouraged by Stalin's policies and decrees.
Given the sort of the new creation of Azerbaijan in 1918 and the disparate peoples that live in that geography, what would the principal language be? What would the culture be?
Well, the principal language of the region, people of the region, from the 14th, 15th centuries onwards became the Turkic, because those were the tribes that ruling the area. The principal language was Turkic, but during the 18th and 19th century, any written language was in Farsi, Farsi lettering and Farsi language. All the historians who lived in the areas of Baku, Paki Khanov, and Karabaghi, which lived in Karabagh, they've written their history books in Farsi. So the modern Azerbaijanis cannot read them, so they have to heavily depend on transliteration and translation of these. They speak the same language now, Turkish, but in 1920, until 1929 it was in Farsi script, Arabic. 29 changed to Latin. In 1939 they changed it to Cyrillic, Russian alphabet. In 1992 back to Latin. So you can imagine what alphabets could the local people read.
Yeah.
Now there's hardly anyone that can read the old books. So when transliterating, they have a free hand how to change and what to alter there. And they do it freely and very, very aggressively.
And how does that relate to the Azerbaijani view of Armenia and Armenians?
Well, it's completely the reverse. The Azerbaijanis say the Armenians appeared in this part of the world in 1828, when after the Turkmenchay agreement, the territory was ceded to Russia. But many travelers, not only maps, many travelers who came to the area, European travelers who passed through the area, came to the area, have written about
you sort of quote them in your book as well, don't you? Different eras, especially in the 18th century.
I've quoted from the 15th, 14th century onwards, travelers talking about the Armenians and Armenians. And look, even going back to Azeri history books, they claim that Shah Abbas of Iran was an Azeri. Fine, okay, let's accept it. But they say there's no Armenian living in the area. Shah Abbas, in the year 1604 and 1605, moved about 300,000-400,000 Armenians from Nakhichevan and Karabakh to Isfahan and established a city called New Julfa there. and settled part of the Armenians there. This is in the record. Everybody knows that. So even their own history books had written about that.
Yeah.
But they refute that. They said there is no Armenians living in the area. There's another sample, for instance, regarding cultural monuments. In Julfa, on the shores of the Arax River, north of that, which is under Azerbaijani control now, there used to be a medieval Armenian cemetery with all the cross stones with carvings in Armenia, until 1997, when the Azeris started to wreck them and topple them and break them into pieces. Eventually, in 2005, they completely eliminated them, and now it's a military maneuver ground there.
Rubin concludes the interview with his thoughts on identity, deep-rooted culture and national transition. He believes that there is a fight within everybody to protect themselves, their borders and their fundamental interests, and that countries behave exactly the same.
So tell us a little about the chapter where you deal with changing cultures in chapter 4. Tell us a little bit about that.
The Azerbaijanis claim that they have had a country there for at least 5,000 years. For 2,000 years they have an independent country and their own culture, etc. Khaja Nasireddin Tusi is a Persian astronomer who, from the name, we know that he was born in Tus, which is about 1,000 miles from Azerbaijan. Because he came to Maraghe, which Iranian Azerbaijani province, which Republic of Azerbaijan claims to be part of their country, and established an observatory there, they claim that Khaji Nasireddin Tusi is an Azeri scientist, Azeri historian, astronomer. This goes on and on, the list goes on and on and on. All the cities, monuments in Iranian Azerbaijan and in Armenia, I claim to be part of the Azeri heritage. If you're in that area, you have to fight with life and death for your own history. All your neighbors will try to alter your history to their own benefit. One has to fight claw and tooth to preserve their own history. My point was that when I started this work, to first write the book in English and then translate it into Armenia or Russian. In this particular case, this book has been translated into Farsi, and I hope that this year it can be printed in Iran.
Yeah. Ruben, I think that's a very good point to end. I think it's a fascinating book you've written. I think the maps are absolutely glorious, and it was a wonderful read, and I think you must be very proud of the way you defended your family's history.
Thank you.